Logan, can you hear me? Okay, Logan, Chris, Harsh, are you able to hear my voice? I'm not sure if the microphone is enabled. If one of you have a microphone enabled computer, you could speak. Okay, Harsh said yes. Okay. Are you in the lab or are you all at your individual machines? Okay, Liv was logging in to project it on the screen. Okay, I will. So Logan, just let me know when it's projected on the screen, and I will start discussing. Also, Logan, if you can let me know if you're able to see the Visual Studio as well as SQL Server screens. I think last time Chris said I didn't record the screen, so I want to make sure you're able to see it. Okay, so Liv, have you been able to project it onto the main screen? Okay, so let me get started first with a note regarding the exam. I'm not sure, well, as far as the microphone is concerned, I'm not sure you can speak, so if you have any questions, just note it in the chat area. Since I'm not in class today, I want to address a few more issues. Ultimately, I don't want the exam to be just something for the grade as much as it has to be a part of your learning and reflect your understanding. So I'm going to move it to April 4, Tuesday, so that there are some concepts I want to discuss with you, which we will be starting today, but I'm not sure I want to make sure that you have a good enough understanding of it, and also to start applying it on your project. And so even though it's a slightly later date compared to when you would usually have your midterm, I think I would rather go with something that where you can apply your understanding rather than, as I said, just a means to just grade. So that was the first note I wanted to make. The second is I want you to work on your projects with the user stories. So I had indicated it last time, but Visual Studio, so your team project, user stories, and start of your class diagram. And I think most of you now have the project posted on Visual Studio Team Services. So next Tuesday I want to ensure that everyone is connected. So please, whoever has access to Team Services under each group, please let me know, and so that I can access your user stories and your class diagram. And if you're still continuing to have problems, then I will discuss this in class on Tuesday. Okay, so So these are the two informational notes that I wanted to start off with. And so for Tuesday, please make sure that you have this for your team project. You already should have been working on it for this week, but for next week, I just want to make sure that there is movement and progress on the team project. Okay, coming back to where we were, end of last class, obviously we had that problem with the migration, and I want to make sure that you understand what the issue was, and then as to where the problem, there were two problems. I'll keep the window next to me so that I can see if anyone asks, I guess, questions. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is the way you can understand whether there's a problem is whenever you do a migration. I just want to stretch this a little bit so you can see. So when I did this last, the previous three migrations, so if I go to initial, you can see that it has all these create table statements with the what will essentially be the column names. So these will become tables and columns in the database when the migration occurs. So that was the initial migration. Then we added college, and you can see that that created the college table with these two columns, and the conference migration went through correctly as well. But when we added in college conference, that you can see it failed. You can see that there's no create table, there's only an index that it's tried to create. So whenever you see it lacking the create table statements, it's an indication that the migration failed. And we discussed the two reasons, the two mistakes I had made, which are actually both database mistakes. And I will I've logged in here. But currently, I rolled everything back, so there are no tables. So the three stages: adding the migration, updating the database to revert it back to the original, essentially the empty state, and then updating the database. So now what we need to do, when there are a couple of different things you can do when you have problems with a migration, but the simplest here would be to just get rid of all the migrations so far. So I'm just going to delete all 4 migrations. I'll keep the configuration file. I'm not going to get rid of configuration under migrations. I'm going to get rid of initial and the other 3 migrations that I added in. Okay, so I have only the configuration file under migrations now. Now, what I'm going to do is to basically set up an entirely new migration called initial. So I'm going to add migration initial. So this becomes an initial migration, but it consists of all of my models along with the identity model. So I'm going to say add migration initial and run this. Okay, so you can see now, if everything goes well, you'll see the create table for college conferences. This was obviously the one that I had problems with end of last class, so that's been created. Then you have colleges created, conferences, and then the identity. So what's happened now is it's basically taken all of the models, the three that we created and the identity model that existed prior from when we just, that's given with the framework, and created this initial migration. Okay, so hopefully you understand what we have done here, in that since we had a problem with one of the migrations, we basically cleaned out all of it and then reinitialized using this as our starting point, with all of the classes that we created, the three plus the identity model. So now if I, and obviously for you, you have to check and see, okay, so let's see, let me see if anyone, Logan or somebody else who did this, have you gotten your initial migration with all the tables, with the create tables? Okay, Logan says the create table statements are not showing up. Is it showing up for anyone else? Lev, okay, Eric, mine works. So one of the things that if you're, so Megan, Eric have it, Lev says my tables are not showing up. Okay. If your tables are, well, when I say tables, obviously it's in this C# code. What you can do is first go back to this update database target 0, and if it says, well, you might lose, this is the reversing of the migrations, and if it says you might lose some data, you use the -force. So try to do this first, update database target -target:0 -force to force the migration to happen, well, the reverse to happen. Okay, who is that? Krista is saying the index with name has the name column order for 0 specified. Okay, so if that's the error, okay, so that for that you have to go into the college conference class, and okay, what we changed at the end of last class in college conference, there were two areas. One was the key that we designated. Since we had a separate primary key, the auto-generated primary key, college conference ID, what I had done setting up a composite key for college ID, conference ID, and begin date, obviously that was conflicting because it was then trying to create two different primary keys, so we can't do that. Instead, we can generate an alternate key using this index annotation. So we have to give the index a name. So we are calling this college conference index. We are saying this has to be unique. That is, the set of values that constitute this this index has to be unique. And Krista was getting an error because she had the order in which the index was being set up. So if there are multiple columns, you have to specify the zero-based ordering index of the ordering of the index. So which means that we have to say which is the first item in the index, college ID. The second item in the index is the conference ID. By giving the same name, you're basically saying, for the index, we are basically saying that these two are part of the same index, but the first property or column to be evaluated in the order is, for the index, is this college ID. The second is conference ID, and then the third is the begin date. So for Krista, you have to change so you probably have 0 for all three of the indexes. You have to change the second to 1 and the third to 2. So if any of the others are having a similar error, then that's where you need to start. So after you make this change, go back, rebuild the solution, and then go through the processes again just to make sure that everything is cleaned out. So revert it by going to target 0. Then add your migration. In this case, it will be add migration initial. And then finally, once you have the migration with the tables, then go ahead and update the database. Okay, Krista, try this out and tell me if it works. About to change. All is good now. Okay. What about the others? A couple of others, Logan and Liv, had said that you've had the same problems. Or, well, you had problems, but I don't know what type of problems you had. Okay, Logan, yours as well. Okay. So once you have the tables, then go in and do your update database. Okay, Liv, I'm going to have to ask you to look at what Eric is doing and see if you can find out what exact. I'm not able to determine what could be the error from the message you have up here. And since I won't have much time to discuss, I want to make sure we keep moving. So if you were to update the database, you will see that this time it runs. Obviously, we only have one migration, the initial migration, and then it runs the seed method from configuration. And remember, we have 3 tables that we are populating: colleges, conferences, and the table, in this case the class that connects the two. So if you go onto your database, okay, and again I will try to narrow this window so that I can actually see if you make any comments or questions. Okay, so if I refresh the table, I should see all my tables here, the 3 plus the identity tables. Okay, now the question or problem with the index, well, the two things. The first was obviously the key. So if I expand the key on college conferences, you can see that it had already designated one of the columns, college conference ID, as a primary key. So, which means that if I try to designate another set, that's where the primary key migration failed, and we have to take that key away from college ID, conference ID, date, begin. But we didn't want these three to repeat. Remember that they were the alternate key. So basically, to set the alternate key, what we said is we'll use indexes. So if you want to check where the indexes are set, there's a separate folder. If you look at college conferences table in SQL Server, go down to indexes, and you can see that there are two indexes here. One is the primary key for college conferences, which is the one that's auto-generated, and that's the clustered index. Clustered indexes can do searches faster, and by default SQL Server sets a clustered index on the primary key. But for every table, you can have only one clustered index. It's physically not possible to do the clustering on more than one index. And you can see the college conference index that we set up. If we wanted, I initially set it as clustered equals true. So what SQL Server or the database was complaining was that I couldn't make two separate indexes being clustered indexes. As I said, it's just physically impossible to organize the rows by both the ID as well as this alternate key. Anyways, that's why it failed. So these are things to keep in mind as you work on the project and going forward. Okay, that was to explain why our migration failed. Okay, then moving on to the next step. Once you have this, just make sure, going to your something that I didn't do, just go to college conferences. Just as I was telling Chris yesterday, this is a very simple test to see that you are getting all your data in here, that the migration is actually working. Okay, so make this check to make sure it is, and then we'll go back to our to Visual Studio to do some. So what we'll do here is we'll go through a simple process. So let's say we want to display all the conferences. Later on, what we'll do is one of the functionalities is going to be the user, let's say, chooses a conference like the Big 12 and wants to get a list of all the colleges that are in the Big 12 conference. So we'll have something like a drop-down list, and the user selects one of the values, and then we have to return the set of colleges in that conference. But for now, we'll do something simpler, which is just getting a list of all conferences. Okay. Well, Chris has some error here. He's listed. So let me see if I can quickly address. It says, what's this name? Getting this error, unable to determine composite primary key ordering. Well, this is what I was saying. You cannot have. We are not using a composite key. We removed the key attribute. So, Chris, if you're sitting next to somebody, reference it, because we no longer have. We initially started off by putting a key on top of college ID, conference ID, and so on, but that creates a composite alternate key which is not allowed if we have this auto-generated column as having a primary key. So you have to take away the key and use just the index. Okay, so Chris, refer somebody sitting next to you to make that change. Okay, so coming back to the class, we want to get the list of all conferences and display it. So that's going to be our simple objective now, and we are going to go through it one step at a time, starting from, so we'll go into the model conference class in the model. So I can either have it, well, I'll go right to the bottom so that that way you'll know. I'm just adding in this new method which gets all the conferences. Okay, so public, I'm going to make it a static method because it's going to be the set of all the conferences, conference objects. So I'll say public static. Okay, I'm going to get, so it's a get all conferences is the name of my method. Okay, and if I'm getting a list of all conferences, it's complaining for two reasons. One is, the main reason is I don't have a return type. What's the return type here? Okay, a list of, since we are returning a list of conferences, it's going to be a list conference. Okay. And obviously this is complaining now because we have promised to return a list of conferences, and we are not doing so inside the body. So I'll create conference list. I'll just let me just close this out so that you can see. So I'm going to make a new list of conferences, and I'm going to return this conference list. Obviously, at this point, there is nothing inside this list. Okay, so where are we getting this list from? There are, you might say, well, there is this populate conferences, but we really don't want to get it from here. This is some sample data. Ultimately, where would all our conferences exist? Where is this data? where did we send all the data to? Into our database, right? So we have the conference table in the database, correct? Conferences. So that's where we are going to go to retrieve the data. And for that, we'll have to represent the database. And usually, the first statement is where you create the database object. So application DB context serves as the means of getting to the database. So application DB context, I'll call this object, since it represents the database, I'm just going to call it the object as database. And since it's an object of this class, I need to use the new keyword to create this object. So again, let me put it on 2 lines so that you can see it. Okay, so I've just created a database object. I have the conference list object. And I come down here, and I want to navigate through the database to the conferences table. Okay. Now, the issue is I'm not just wanting well, you can see that if I just say conferences, it's complaining, but what I want to do is to give this conference list the set of all rows from the conferences table, but since this is a list here, a list of conference objects, you have to make it explicit that you want to convert it to a list of conference objects of all of the rows that you're getting from the database. So basically this statement is saying, go to the database, go to the conferences table, get me all the rows. If we have time today, if not Tuesday, we'll see how we do the queries inside C# on the table. So it's going to be SQL on the C# side. Okay, but for now, this is the equivalent of select all from the conferences table. Okay, so we have gotten all the rows from conferences and converted into conference objects for the list. Finally, we are returning that list. So this creates the simple method that will get us all the conferences that are there, with essentially the conference IDs and the conference names. Once we have this, I'm just going to save and build it to make sure that whatever code I added in is actually working. Okay. And once I know that this method is built properly, the next step that I'm going to do, if I follow the agile process, I want to test to make sure that this method is doing what I'm expecting it to do. So I'm going to go into the test project. So just to make sure that you can see this, I close the so go into the test project, okay, into testing the models, and this time instead of college test, we're going to test the conference. I'm going to right-click, add unit test, and it created it as unit test 1. I don't want it to be unit test 1, so I'm going to go in and change the file name. So right-click on the file name, rename from unit test 1 to, I'm going to call it conference test. I usually name it the same as the class with the test as at the end as a suffix. Okay, once you change the file name, Visual Studio will ask you, do you want to change the class name as well? And I always do that, so this gets changed to conference test. Okay. So what I want to do inside is obviously test the method that I just created. So the name of my method is get, and again I'll close this so that I have a little more space. Okay, get all conferences. This is the name, okay, of the method. And usually the naming convention that I use is get all conferences test. Don't need to add method. Okay, so get all conferences is the name of the method in the class inside MVC app. I'm going to call it, I'm going to give this suffix test to it. Okay, so, and this is a simple test. Next Tuesday I'll show you a more complex version and what to do when you're doing a little more complex testing. But remember the AAA approach to testing: arrange, act, and assert. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are going to do a simple check of the number of rows that we are expecting to be returned, or the method is going to get from the database. So what we've set up here is, let's say int expected number of conferences. So for this, I'm going to look inside my database and see for conferences, let's see, where is my set of conferences? Let's do a select on it. And I have 3 conferences: Big East, Big 12, and ACC. So my expected number is going to be 3. I need another variable for actual number of conferences. I'm going to initialize it to 0 until I actually act. This value is like going to remain at 0, and then it gets changed. And the third variable that I would need as I make my arrangement is a list of the conference objects, and you can see it's not recognizing it when I type in the class name. So the first thing that I have to do is to have a using statement that references the MVC app and models, and it doesn't recognize list either, so I have to again reference the collections dot generic class library. So now after I have those 2 using statements, it should okay, let's see. Now I'm going to say this is the list of all conferences, and I'll just set it to new list of conference. So basically I'm just arranging or initializing everything here. And then the second part is where you come to acting. Okay, so this time I'm going to just briefly pause to have you think about what the action is, because this part is a little more, I think, obvious or intuitive. We want an expected compared with an actual. But what is the action that we are taking here? I want you to just spend a minute to think, and after you think, if you figure it out, you can type it in the chat to see what you would actually, what is the actual action. Has anyone figured it out? Okay, let's see. What is this method testing? You said it is testing get all conferences. So what should the action be? You need to create an object of the database. Okay. Remember, Megan, that we this time we are actually using this get all conferences method. So that method is already having the database object. So we don't want to create the database object again in the test method. Instead, what are we going to do? Call the method. Okay, good. So we want to call this, what's this method called? It's in conference. So it's called get all conferences. So get all conferences is the method we need, and you can see that the IntelliSense is prompting me to choose get all conferences test because it doesn't understand what get all conferences is. So by now you should know what we need to do. I deliberately created this error here, so you need to be able to say what do you need to do to fix this. And obviously, since we created it as a static method, we have to prefix it with conference dot get all conferences. Okay, so that's one part of the action, but not the full action itself. There are still things we need to add on to it. So when we say get all conferences, if you hover over it, it tells you what it does. After it does its work, what's it going to provide? So what's the missing piece in the statement? Has anyone figured out what's missing here? What do we need to add to complete the statement? Assign the list. Good. What Eric just said. Eric and Megan said this. Okay. So let's see. On the left side here, all conferences. So we are basically assigning whatever we get from the method, which in turn, remember, goes to the database. We are getting it back here, but we still don't have the count. So what we need to do next is, so the next part of the action is we want the actual number of conferences, which is the count. Okay, and for that we need to then say all conferences the list dot do a count on it. Okay, so we get the actual count, which initially we just had it initialized to 0, but now we say go to the method in the database, go to the method which goes to the database, retrieves all the rows. So we are going to count that number of rows. And then finally the assert, and let me again give you a minute to think through what the assert is going to be. What are we asserting here? Has anyone figured out what are we asserting? Okay, Krista, assert or equal. Okay, this is the simple test I said. We are just checking the numbers. The more complex one, which we'll do next week, is actually look inside of these lists and say, are the actual values in these lists the ones that I'm expecting? Okay, so for now we'll do the simple test of expected number of conferences against the actual number of conferences. Okay, so this is a very simple test. Every time you create a method, some functionality, you want to ensure that its logic is correct, at least with this type of simple test. So I'm going to, again, rebuild the solution so that I can pick up this test. Go to Test Explorer, Test Windows, Test Explorer, to still building in my case. Okay, so it's not showing up. Usually it has to build fully before the test shows up, the new test. Okay, you can see that once it built the solution, my get all conferences test showed up. If I run all, okay, you should, however, always you should run it at least a couple of times to make sure that it, in this case, we are just doing select type operations, retrievals, or reads, so it shouldn't make a, like it should run every time. But when you change data with inserts, deletes, and updates, sometimes it will pass the first time but fail on subsequent occasions. So that's why you should run it multiple times. And if you are getting an error, then if it fails, then you should set breakpoints. So usually you should set the breakpoint at around, so one breakpoint I would set at the point where you're actually calling the method, right here, and the second one just after you return. And then, so that I usually set these two breakpoints, and then I would set a third inside of the method. So I will set one somewhere here to make sure I'm getting it in, and then I'll set one right before it goes out or gets returned back from this method back to wherever it's getting called from. Okay, so I'm hoping that most of you have this in green. can a couple of you let me know if you're having it in green. If you're not, as I said, you have to get into the practice of putting these breakpoints and debugging. Okay, Logan, green. Okay, so before proceeding to the UI, you always want to have this test in green. Okay, we have another 20 minutes. So I'm going to go to the next part. So this is usually the cycle that you take whenever you're doing agile development. First, the model, so the model and the test, they sort of go hand in hand. You want to get this working with the green before you move on to the next, which is, in our case, it's going to be a controller. We are going to start with a very simple controller, so we are going to sort of hand code it. Sometime later next week, I'll show you how you can generate a controller with a lot of functionalities, but that will add a huge amount of code, and it might confuse you, all the extra code that's in there. So for now, I'm going to just create a simple controller. So I don't want to create it inside of the test, so be careful about that. I'm going to close out the test project and then open up my MVC app. And obviously, since I have this working, I'll not have it have the breakpoints. It doesn't hurt, but I just don't want to have breakpoints now. Also pin it so that I can show you what I'm doing here. So I need to go into the controller for the MVC app, the controller folder, and then right click on the controllers folder. I'm going to say add controller. And I'm going to create a very simple MVC5 controller, which is an empty controller. Later on, we are going to use the entity framework to generate, but that's, as I said, a much more, it adds a huge amount of code, which I don't want right now. And we are going to sort of build it from scratch so we understand how to build up the controller and how to have it communicate both with the model as well as view. So going to add the empty controller, it calls it a default controller. I'm going to have you call this college. Well, we are now dealing with what are we? Well, we are in the conference, right? So I'll call it conference controller. Let's see. I want to call this conference simple controller. Later on, we'll have a more complex version. In case you're not able to see this, let me put it on Notepad. Conference simple controller. I'll add this in, and then I'll put it on Notepad. So what I called this was conference simple controller. Let me increase the size in case you're not able to see it. Okay, conference simple controller is the name of no spaces. This is just like you name classes. A controller is nothing but a class, a special type of class. So that's the name I gave this controller, conference simple controller. Okay. Anytime you create a controller, you can see that this is the name of the class. Then it says, whenever you see this colon, it implies it's inheriting. So it's inheriting from a built-in MVC controller class. which has a lot more functionality that you can sort of draw upon by inheriting from it. Okay, so it comes with a very simple index method, which doesn't really have anything inside. It's just saying it's returning an action result. So what we'll set up here is something that's very simple. We are going to say, let me ask you this. So this is a conceptual question. So the controller has to, so what the controller method is going to do is get data from model and then send data to view. Okay, so those are the actions it's going to take. So, we could keep it as index, or we could call it something else. This is going to, what it's going to do is display all conferences. So instead of calling this method index, I'm going to say display all conferences. Okay, so that's the name of this method. Okay, just need to be conscious of time. When I say get data from the model, how do I get data from the model? Do you remember from what we did on the Fibonacci app, where we had a method in the controller? Where did it get the data from? How did it get it? View bag. Okay, Megan, what we did with the view bag was we put it into a view bag in the controller and sent it to the view. But here we could do that again, but still, even in the Fibonacci series, the data was brought from somewhere into the view bag. Where is it brought from? So if you think of the MVC, what constitutes the data component? Which of them, the M, V, or the C? So as I pointed out here, it's the model that has the data. So when we say the model has the data, in this case we have the model comprises all these classes. So which of the classes is going to provide us the data that we need to display all conferences? Okay, Liv, which you pointed out it's M. The M is the data. Which one of these? So M is made up of the three classes we created: college, college conference, conferences, the identity models, which we have not yet gotten into, and then there are something called view models, account and manage, but we've not gotten into them either. So Liv, you're correct. Conference is the class. Conference, and as you can see, it doesn't recognize it, so which means we have to have the using statement and then say conference dot, we want to get all the conferences. Okay, so this is, remember, it gets a list of conferences. So I need to, and this was Eric who told us what we needed to do on the test method. So we do the same thing here inside the controller method. So list conference, well, this is all conferences. Okay, so I'm getting the data from the model inside of this controller method. Okay. And once I have this, I can then send it to a view. and the way I can send it is that you can see that this is a constructor for a view. So if I just, it says 1 of 8. There are 8 different versions of the constructor. You can just send a view name. You can just send the model, which is the data. You can send a view name. You can send a view with the object, which is the data, and so on. So in this case, we are trying to keep it fairly simple, so we will just send the data. So this is, Megan pointed out, so we had earlier seen one way of sending data is using a view bag. A second way of sending the data is you send a model, and this is essentially what constitutes the model. We send it through the view constructor. So we are sending the data we got from the model as a parameter in the view constructor itself, and this is going to get sent to the view. So this was option 1, which we saw with the Fibonacci, was using a view bag, and this is option 2, is where we send it, send the model. So send the model through the view constructor as a parameter. Okay. So now this is going over to the view. How many minutes do I have? About 10. Okay. So I need a view now. If I don't provide a view explicitly here, a view name, the expectation is that the view will have the same name as the method, that's display all conferences. And you can see that when we created the constructor, it also created a folder for us called by the same name, Conference Simple Controller. So our view that this is going to get sent to should be inside that folder by convention. So I can create it in multiple ways. I could either right-click on the folder and add a view, or I could just select the method and then right-click and say Add View. And again, I'm going to make it a very simple view. You can see empty, without a model. There are all kinds of types of views we could create, but I'm going to create the simplest type of view, again, to get an understanding so that when we create more complex versions, you would understand what's happening a little better. So let's create this display all conferences as the view name. It's an empty template. I'm going to add it in. It will get added under conference. You can see where it came in this folder hierarchy, under views, under conference, simple display all conferences .cshtml, and you can see that it gives a view bag title. This is, for us, it's not going to make much of a difference. We can keep it if you want, but so I'm just give spaces here for display purposes. This is the header that shows up on the page. Okay. And let's say we want to display all of the conferences. So for this, there is an important addition that you have to make at the top. You have to reference the model, in this case, whichever class that's getting sent over. I'm just going to have you think about this for a minute. Okay, what what is the class from which this data is being constituted? Which class is this? And if you look at Liv's answer, you'll see what the answer has to be. It is the conference class. Okay. So if I come back to this at the top, I have to use this @ symbol to indicate that it is the C# side now, not just HTML. And the keyword is model. So I'm saying which model am I referencing, and I have this MVC app dot models dot, and it is the conference model. Okay, so that's the model. Now, this will be fine if it is only one single object that of conference that I'm dealing with. But how many conference objects am I going to get based off of how much data I currently have? Is it just one? How many are we expecting? How many rows of data or how many conference objects is this list going to contain? 3, correct. And the reason I ask this is it becomes very important here. If you just say models.conference, it's going to say there's only one object, and you have to use this. There is a keyword. You have to put this entire thing inside these angled brackets, and then use a keyword called IEnumerable. If you can find it right here, and the IntelliSense, okay, IEnumerable. So basically, you're saying I'm expecting multiple objects from the conference class. So essentially, multiple conference objects are going to come into this view. Okay, so that's why this becomes very important, and I want you to understand that. Okay, now let's see, how many more minutes do I have? About 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, let me see if we can go through this really quickly. I'm going to create a table element to display, and if you want to have it, there are built-in cascading style sheets, and the way you pull up that it's for styling rather than have plain tables, you have a class called table. So if you do this, it will give little more of the styling as opposed to being a plain table. So this is HTML here. I'm just going to say table row at the top, and there are going to be 2 cells, so TR. So let me break this down. So table header, there are going to be 2 column headers, conference ID, and the second header is conference name. So this is the row for the header. This is each of the cells. Okay, that's the head. So the body here, the body, remember, you can have multiple rows of, like in this case, we are expecting 3 rows. So we are going to use a for each loop. And for the for each loop, this is, we cannot declare, there is a generic data type called var. So this refers to any type of object. Okay, so var, so we want to look at each conference, and instead of saying it's in a particular list, in the view, the way you reference this list of conference objects is by saying look inside the model that was sent over. Okay, so the @ symbol to indicate that C# code for each the data type. This is each object, like how we have done in a for each loop, inside of this collection of objects in the model. Okay. Now open, close curly braces, and remember that you have table at the very end here. Okay, to close. Okay, but inside of the curly braces, we construct each of the individual rows. So TR is for each individual row, and then you have to have each individual column within the row, which is a TD. Okay, and within each of these columns inside of each row, you want to get into each conference object. So I say at each conference dot. The first column, remember, is conference ID. So the IntelliSense should provide you the option of selecting this property to display, right? And the second column for each row, okay, is going to be, again, we have to look inside of. Remember, each object is or in this case, going to be represented by this each conference. So at each conference dot conference name. So if you save this and run this, I'm pretty much out of time now. So this, if you run it, it should open up the web page, and if everything connected properly, it should basically give us the list of all the conferences. Okay, so this is what you should be seeing. Since we are out of time now, I'm going to stop. If you are having it, hopefully many of you actually have this display. If you're not having it, please go back, review this video. I've recorded it, and you can work on it and come to class. Try to have this functioning. The other is work with your group on creating the user stories and an initial class diagram like what we discussed here for the basketball app, a starting class diagram like this. And on Tuesday I will meet with all the groups to see where you are. Okay, I'll stop now, and I'll discuss with you in class on Tuesday.